So my spiritual reading this morning comes from a book called And Morning Came by Megan McKenna. Still, what is mystery? Perhaps it is a concept that enables us to search our languages, cultures, and experiences for what is true. This word teaches us that the more we know about something, the less we can explain it. And that any experience of mystery puts us in awe of what is and tells us bluntly that we know nothing at all, regardless of our study, our erudition, and our information. Mystery is something to fall into, to stumble upon, to be caught up in, to be carried by, and to submit to singularly and with the rest of humanity. Mystery is the envelope we dwell in and are always opening to find out what is still unknown, uncovered, and unrevealed to us. Life itself is a mystery. Being born and dying are mysteries. And all that happens in between is mysterious, dangerous, exhilarating, freeing, and devastating. Mystery is encounter with the unknown, or more precisely put, in capital letters, the unknown.
Our scriptural reading this morning is from Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary of Magdala, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought perfumed oil so that they could anoint Jesus. Very early, just after sunrise on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb. They were saying to one another, "Who will roll back the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked, they found that the huge stone had been rolled back. On entering the tomb, they saw a young person sitting at the right, dressed in a white robe. They were very frightened, but the youth reassured them. "Do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was crucified. He has risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him? Now go and tell the disciples and Peter, Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee, where you will see him just as he told you." They made their way out and fled from the tomb, bewildered and trembling, but they said nothing to anyone because they were so afraid.
Kids, you want to come up and spend a couple minutes with me? We're going to put children's time in a different spot today. I think maybe if you all sit down over here, that'll be good. Got a few more coming. Props. It's so nice to see all of you here this morning, and you all look so wonderful. So thank you for coming, and thanks for coming up. So, a bunch of weeks ago, I talked to you about a word that was intention, which is a really big word, which meant that you mean to do something, you want to do something, you plan to do something, you intend to do something. And so we talked about that for the last 6 weeks, all of these things that we hopefully would set our minds to doing and getting done. And when I shared with you that first time, I told you that last October, I think, I purchased an online painting class. And I had every intention, some of you may remember this story, every intention of working hard and getting that painting, going through that painting class and being done with my painting by Christmas. And it was 6 weeks ago where I showed you that all I had gotten done was the practice background. Okay, my practice background. And this isn't quite what I showed you, but it's darn close. The outline of the dragonfly for the real picture, right? That was as far as I got 4 months or 5 months after I enrolled in that class. So I set my intention to, during the weeks of Lent, finish the painting class. You know, we have to, it's one thing to say you're going to do something, but it's something else entirely to actually do it, right? So you learn how to swim. But if you're going to compete, what do you have to do? You have to practice and practice and practice some more, right? And that's the same with learning an instrument or getting good grades or playing a sport, anything. You have to actually do it. You can't just say you're going to do it. So if I just said I'm going to finish the class, that doesn't get me anywhere unless I actually do it, right? So guess what? Finish the class. It may not be the best ever, but this is the painting from the class. So what is it? It's a dragonfly, that's right. And I thought this is also a really cool thing to talk about for today. So I have this picture, and then I have this picture. Do you know what this is? It is not a cockroach.
Dragonfly larva?
Wow, well, it's almost a larva, but this is a nymph, which is a sort of like a teenager dragonfly maybe, because the larva might be the baby. And then so the eggs hatch, and then eventually they get to be this. And so this is a dragonfly nymph, and it lives in the water for about 2 to 5 years, depending on the dragonfly. And it eats and it grows and it eats and it grows and it eats and it grows some more until one beautiful sunny warm day it climbs up the stalk of a plant that's sticking out of the water, and it hangs there on the side of that stalk. And as it sits there in the sun, the outside of its body breaks open, and this beautiful dragonfly emerges. Isn't that cool? It's amazing and mysterious and wonderful. And that dragonfly sits there and its wings dry and expand, and then it flies away. So I wanted to talk to you about the dragonfly today because it's sort of like an Easter story. But a couple days ago, if you were with me on our Day of Tears, we sadly talked about Jesus, who was a really amazing guy, right? He fought for justice and he accepted everybody and he loved people that others thought were unlovable. And he took kids up on his lap, and he was just an amazing teacher, and he worked for justice. But there were some people who had a lot of power who didn't like what he was doing. And so they killed him. And everybody was sad. Friday night was about being sad, and it was about grieving Jesus being gone, even after he had been this great person and great teacher, and they thought he was going to do amazing things. And so it was the death of dreams and the death of expectations, in addition to just losing a really good friend and teacher. And all day Saturday was spent in sadness and in quiet and in thinking and in praying. And then on Sunday morning, a couple of the women who had been with Jesus, they came back out to where he'd been put in they put him in a big hole, big cave in the wall, and they had rolled a big stone in front of it. But he hadn't been prepared the way that his body hadn't been prepared the way that Jews prepare bodies for burial. And so the women came back out and they had spices and they had cloth and they were going to make his body smell all nice and good, and they were going to wrap him all up and they were going to say goodbye. But they got there and the stone was rolled away from the tomb and he was gone. And they didn't know what happened to him. They didn't know where he went. And it took them a long time, actually, to figure out that even though he wasn't with them in the way he used to be with them, that his spirit was still with them, that they could still somehow feel his presence with them, that they maybe even sometimes thought they saw him, or that they thought they heard him, but somehow he was still present to them. And that's why we're still here, is because something mysterious and unexpected happened. A transformation happened on that weekend. Just like the nymph transforms into a dragonfly, so Jesus transformed into a spiritual presence that's still within all things. So it's kind of like, nymph turns into the dragonfly, it's kind of like it's dead. But it's not really, because it's a dragonfly, right? So you die to the old form, and you're alive in a new form. Sort of the same way with Jesus. He died in one form, but he was alive in a new way. It's the transformations in life, and we all have transformations. You have transformations in your life, where there's a part of you that you leave behind, and there's a part of you that comes alive. So all the different stages you go through in your life. You go through transformations as fast as you grow out of your clothes. Have any of you had graduations from kindergarten? Maybe? No, maybe some of you have, a long time ago, a few of you. But you go through little graduations, or you finish a class, and you can no longer go back to being as young as you were. You're new, and you're bigger, and you knew stuff. And so, in a way, you're not that form anymore, you're a new form. Or maybe you go from Cub Scouts to Boy Scouts, or Brownies to Girl Scouts. That's a transformation. Or maybe, when you're really little, you can't walk and then you learn how to walk. That's a huge transformation. Or you can't talk and you learn how to talk. Is another big transformation. Can you think of any others? How about learning to ride a bike? Not knowing how to ride a bike, and then you can ride a bike. There's all kinds of transformations in life. Yeah, Alex?
I couldn't ride a scooter, now I can ride a grown-up scooter.
That's awesome. So he said he couldn't ride a scooter, now he can ride a grown-up scooter. So, yeah, that's a transformation, and now you know what it's like, and you're different, and you're changed because of it. And you'll never say, oh, I can't ride a scooter anymore. That part of you is gone. Now you're a whole new, exciting person. So that's what today celebrates. The fact that there are always transformations. There are always times where we're going to have to let go of part of who we were and live into something new. And no matter how dark or how difficult life gets, there's always the possibility for a transformation and for a new life. Okay, will you all say a prayer with me this morning? Loving God.
Loving God.
Thank you for transformations.
Thank you for transformations.
Help us to remember
Help us to remember
that even in our darkest days,
that even in our darkest days,
new life is possible.
new life is possible.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for coming up.
Thanks for coming up.
Oh, wait, just 2 seconds. I forgot to tell you. So there's a craft afterwards. Mary's going to help you with a craft, and you can make dragonflies. So there's this little dragonfly with cut-out wings out of aluminum cans and beads, and then there's a jelly bean dragonfly. So make sure that you meet back here at the tables afterwards, okay? It does look delicious. I'm hoping someone makes me one. So they don't fly very well, though, I must say. So you get the gist of today, right? I stopped trying to figure out Easter a long time ago. It's a mysterious day with lots of unanswered questions. And to try and make sense of the whole thing sort of denies the mystery in it. Which is why I pulled the passage from Megan McKenna, where she talks about mystery and the spiritual experiences that we have. I've been doing this gig for 25 years now, and I've heard a lot of people with a lot of mysterious spiritual experiences who are afraid to share with everybody else. My guess is you've all had one, but maybe you're afraid to tell somebody else, or you only tell that one specific person. But we've all had these amazing experiences, and so I just treat today like a mystery. Whatever you want to believe, go ahead and believe. Because none of us really, at the end of the day, knows. It's interesting, Megan McKenna says, says basically the more you know, the less you know how to explain it, right? And the more mystery you experience, the more awe you experience, the more you realize you know nothing at all. Which is a real conundrum for a pastor because I have to figure out what to say on Sunday mornings. And frankly, the longer I do this and the more I know and the more I study, the less I know. And the less I know what to say. So it's a minor miracle that anything comes out of my mouth on Sunday mornings. It's a major miracle that you all show up and listen to me.
That's because you're always amazing.
I'm like, God bless you, Sue. So, if we think about Easter and resurrection from a literal standpoint, all it does is raise a whole bunch of questions that we can't answer. What really happened? And do we all get resurrected? And is there a body, or am I going to look like I'm 20 again? Because that would be really cool. Or, where do we go? And who goes there? And why do they get to go there? And then maybe we should talk about reincarnation and karma, because what about all that? So we can go down a whole rabbit hole, like an Easter rabbit hole, of questions and answers, or lack of answers, if we start going down the resurrection on a literal basis. But if we talk about resurrection metaphorically, like I tried to do with the kids, we all have resurrection experiences. I firmly believe that you have all had a resurrection experience and that there will be more in your future, because that's what life is. It's like this string of, we call it ups and downs, right? But it's really a string of deaths and resurrections. The little deaths in our lives and the big deaths in our lives. So let's just throw a few out, can we? Just for fun. Name a resurrection experience you've had. What have you gone through that's... Marriage. Now wait a minute. Was that the death or the resurrection?
Resurrection of marriage. Right.
Okay. So the whole process of maybe dying to that single person and growing into a relationship with somebody else is leaving one kind of life person behind, growing into something else. What else?
Getting through COVID without going back to old behaviors.
Getting through COVID without going back to old behaviors.
Learning new ways of finding where are my weak spots and how to deal with all that lengthy stuff we went through.
So the resurrection experience of learning and growing through that whole process. And certainly as we came out of COVID, a little bit at a time, it felt like tiny resurrection after tiny resurrection as we regained things that we used to be able to do. Yeah. What else?
Jobs.
In what way, Dean?
You change jobs and then you retire.
So is the resurrection the retirement, or is it the new job?
Just the change.
Just the change. Hopefully the change for the better. I think a lot of us have gone through old jobs that dragged us down or were difficult and found new life in a new spot and with a new group of people. And then eventually you climb up on that stalk and you shed all of it and you get to be the dragonfly, right? Clarice?
Becoming a mother and then becoming a mother of adult children.
Ah. So are those two different transformations? And there's probably multiple in there, as my 3 adult children are sitting right in front of you. Yeah, you count now. Once you get married, that's like I gain a child. That's how that works. So yes, motherhood is absolutely a transformational experience. Commencement. Which is transformational not only for the one being commenced, if that's a word, but for the parents who are proud and sad and excited and grieving and the whole 9 years of all of that. But there is resurrection on the other side of that. Yeah, Jessica.
I would say just switching churches.
Switching churches. Well, good. If you ever leave us, I'll feel like, this was a death for you. But
What I did.
and we're glad you did. I'm grateful. We are all grateful that you're here and that you do experience it that way. Church as a resurrection.
As a gardener and loving flowers, every spring, it's the resurrection of your garden.
Absolutely.
In winter, everything dies and then everything comes back. And it's just it's all over again. Every spring you feel, when you love a garden and love flowers as I do, it's always such a joy to know that those things will resurrect again and come back.
Absolutely. This is, and I think that maybe more so for gardeners, but I think for all of us, those little signs of spring, this day could be any other time of the year, because it has to, the energy of this time where things are renewing and coming back to life, and all this stuff we thought was dead and looked like it was gone, and we weren't sure it was going to last through that last 12 inches of slush we got on the ground. Our poor little daffodils were sticking up 6 inches, and they all still lived, and they're coming back. And what a resurrection experience every spring is. Sure, Kim.
Just overcoming addiction.
Absolutely. Overcoming an addiction of any type is a trial and a process and a struggle, but such a resurrection experience on the other side of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Going through an illness.
Sure. So even for you, for example, to have dealt with cancer and to have come through the other side. That was Shirley, by the way. They unmuted themselves, yes. No. Yeah, even literal death, grieving the death of someone else and feeling like you can't go on and feeling that emptiness, and then getting to perhaps slowly to a point of embracing life again and what there is to live. There's so much, little ones and big ones. How does resurrection feel? Put a feeling to it. How do you know? Could be a little scary. Absolutely. So if you want to look at the women who ran from the tomb, right? Mark's gospel is kind of weird that way, because it leaves us hanging with the women go to the tomb and he's not there, and they run, and it says they don't say anything to anyone, which it clearly did not happen because they must have told somebody, right? But yeah, there's fear before the transformation. And then what? What does the transformation feel like?
A burst of energy, excitement, enthusiasm when that change comes about.
Sure.
You just seem so excited about something new.
A burst of energy, some excitement, enthusiasm, she said. Gratitude. Freeing. Exuberant. Hope, is that what I heard? New hope. Absolutely. Pat.
As I was looking at the flowers that are coming up, I was thinking how nice it would be if we could experience the loved ones we've lost in that same way, that they would wake from the dead, like the flowers are waking from the dead. And then, just now I was thinking, in a sense, every morning when we wake up, it's like a resurrection. Yeah. And that we should face that with hope and expectation instead of groaning and oh no.
So instead of groaning as we get out of bed with our aches and pains and our stiffness, to face it with enthusiasm and energy, the resurrection of each of us for a new day and the possibilities that face us. Absolutely. To embrace every moment of every second. I think that's part of, especially a spiritual resurrection, is to claim the moment and the beauty in the moment. So I want to, there are countless resurrection stories, which is as it should be, and countless even in this room. But let me share just two with you today. So Philip Yancey is a spiritual writer and was a journalist for a while. He wrote a book called Soul Survivor, and in it he interviewed a whole bunch of people who had meaningful stories to him, inspirational stories. And one was Dr. Paul Brand and his wife, Margaret. And this goes back a few years, probably 70s, 80s, 90s. They were doctors in India treating patients with leprosy. Back in the time when, and I don't know how much different it's gotten, where leprosy was anathema, right? Nobody wanted to treat any of those folks. And even one step further, Paul Brand was an orthopedic surgeon. So he did many surgeries on people with leprosy to give them their abilities back. So Philip Yancey interviewed one man by the name of Sadan, who had been a patient of the two of theirs. And he walked in to see this, to interview this little guy, and he said he looked like a little Gandhi sitting cross-legged on the bed, skinny and bald, and big spectacles. But he had no toes on his feet as he sat there cross-legged on the bed. And Sadan said, well, I met the Brands too late to save my toes, but they gave me shoes to walk with. And as he was interviewed, he spoke in kind of a high sing-songy voice, and he told of all of the struggles and the rejections that he'd had as a person with leprosy, being harassed at school, being forcibly thrown off a bus, having employers who refused to have anything to do with him even though he was talented and skillful, having hospitals who just brusquely said, we don't treat lepers here, and turned him away. And I think if it was that bad at the end of the 20th century, how bad was it in Jesus' time, right? So finally, Sadan made his way to Doctors Paul and Margaret Brand. And he said he remembered that first night being there. He showed up on their porch. And Dr. Paul took his hands and his feet in his own, and he examined him. And it was shocking to Sadan because of all of the medical people he had ever seen, he said a few of them had examined him at a distance. None had ever touched him. In fact, he couldn't remember the last time he had experienced human touch at all. And then even one step further, they allowed him to stay in their house that night. When all he'd experienced really were medical personnel who were terrified of the disease, these two, just in compassion and love, took him in and helped him. Multiple surgeries, multiple procedures, and he was eventually able to use his hands again. Was able to get a job doing the accounts for 53 free mobile clinics for leprosy. I figured out the date, it must have been around the year 2000 when his daughter got married. And he still wasn't able to be in the service or at the service. He was too afraid of how people would respond to him, and he didn't want to ruin his daughter's day. And so he watched from a car in the parking lot. He told all of these stories and just horrific suffering and awful life. And then he looked at Philip Yancey and he said, and yet after all of this, I'm happy I had the disease. And Yancey looked at him and went, happy? And he said, yeah, he said, otherwise, without leprosy, I would have been a normal man with a normal family, striving after wealth and a higher position in society, and I would never have known people like Drs. Paul and Dr. Margaret, and I would never have known the God that lives in them. If we look at that as a resurrection story, it comes on so many different levels. On restoring relationships, on just being touched and being loved and having someone being compassionate to you, on restoring one's ability to be a productive part of society, on restoring one's spiritual faith and hope in God. There's so much there that even the struggle and the suffering for him became secondary to all of the joy and the uplifting parts of what he'd been through. So the other story comes from a book called The Leap by Stephen Taylor. He shares the story of a man named Graham who had quite a spiritual transformation after a traumatic experience. His wife was diagnosed with terminal and untreatable lung cancer. And in a very short period of time, she needed to be on oxygen. She could hardly walk more than a few steps. But she was determined to make it to the end of the year. She wanted to make it through Christmas, to have one last Christmas with their 17-year-old son. But in October, her son was killed in a car crash on his way to a party. And after he died, her decline in that disease was very, very rapid. And in fact, she passed away the night of his funeral. So Graham is suddenly left feeling like he has no identity, like it's been stripped from him. He'd been a husband for 22 years, a father for 17 years, no other children, and it was suddenly all gone. All that was left was a deep emptiness and a loss of identity. Different than a lot of stories I had read. Graham had a background, he learned how to meditate when he was in high school. And he'd been a practicing Buddhist for a number of years. And so he knew that he shouldn't be ignoring that emptiness and that pain that he felt. That what was required was to stop resisting it and to actually go into it, to allow himself to feel it, to dwell in it, to be in it, to embrace it if possible. And as he did that, he found that even within the grief and even within the pain and the emptiness deep inside, there was a stillness underneath it all. And that stillness reassured him that all was well. And he was able to go forward, surrendering into that pain and into that emptiness. And he felt a shift in who he was, in how he operated into the world. At the very core of his being, he felt a shift. And that's not to say that the grief was just suddenly poof gone, or the pain was suddenly poof gone. But underneath it all, there was a deep reassurance of being held, being not alone. He said this, he said, "It shattered the thin shell of my ego. I could see through the illusion of separateness. All those years I'd been looking for a pair of glasses which I was already seeing out of. The idea that all was one had been an intellectual concept, but now it became real. And I can't imagine not seeing it anymore."